There's a sense of urgency that we all must do something.
We shouldn't feel defeated.
We can do it. Perpetual planet means protecting nature as if our lives depend on it.
We have to keep hope alive.
How can we use our skills to solve these global problems?
I love for my research to have an impact in the life of people.
It takes a collective effort from all of us to inspire, to educate.
Putting all the knowledge together.
Más gente involucrada, más gente.
We are not going to stop until we get the job done.
It was just the beginning.
Fantastic.
Well, good evening. So here, how many, has anybody new to the Explorers Club? Nobody here is, everybody's been here before, right? Yes, so I don't have to go through the, our bragging and our shtick, so that's excellent start. World Oceans Week, several years ago, we started a program of ambassadors to sort of generate interest and for, social media use and that sort of thing. And we select 3 ambassadors every year. And I was very much an advocate for salmon, which is so ubiquitous and so threatened. And most people have no idea because every time they go into their supermarket, there it is, wrapped in plastic, ready to go. But you're going to learn in the next hour quite different that is. I'm sure most of you already know. Anyway, given time constraints, you're very fortunate because I'm not going to speak for very long. But I am going to introduce our 2 hosts who are eminently qualified and unbelievably passionate about the very fish. From the Atlantic side of our story comes Explorers Club member Deirdre Brennan, who is best known in this room for her internationally released documentary, Atlantic Salmon, Lost at Sea, which sheds light on the collapse of wild Atlantic salmon and research around that issue. Deirdre is also an award-winning television production designer with multiple daytime Emmy Awards. Then from the Pacific side, we have the indomitable Duncan Berry, also a club member. Duncan is president of the board of the Cascade Head Biosphere Collaborative in Oregon, which is a UNESCO biosphere. It's a UNESCO heritage site. What is biosphere? It's a we say biosphere again. He is also a master of jiataku, the Japanese art of printing from natural objects. Take a look in the bar if you didn't notice when you were down there. And if the place smells a little fishy, it's because we've had a couple of jiataku workshops here this week from here in the Clark Room. And with that, take it away, Duncan and Deirdre.
For millions of years, in the cold, rich waters of the Northern Hemisphere, an extraordinary drama has unfolded. A creature of remarkable resilience and determination has navigated between 2 worlds, fresh and salt water, creating one of nature's most spectacular journeys. The creatures on this journey are none other than that remarkable family of fish we call salmon, the original explorers.
Welcome, everyone, to our Salmon as a Mirror presentation. We are your official salmon ambassadors, hosts for World Oceans Week. Thank you for your introduction, Mark. My name is Deirdre Brennan, and as you've heard, I'm a documentary filmmaker focusing on Atlantic salmon recovery and the communities that depend on them.
Yes, thank you, Mark, and the entire Explorers Club family and membership. I start out most talks like this by saying my name and that I like salmon more than most people I meet. And this usually occasions a laugh, I heard some, but I go on to say I'm absolutely serious, and it's because of their remarkable superpowers and the way in which they conduct their everyday lives. Now, our colleague Conrad Gowell, fish biologist and conservation expert extraordinaire, working with the renowned Wild Fish Conservancy, was originally scheduled to present with us tonight, but unfortunately was not able to be here. But his presence is very much felt in every slide of this presentation.
What you're about to see took us several months to write and source imagery for, and was created just for you and those that are watching it virtually at World Oceans Week.
That said, this is not a wonky PowerPoint, and we are not a panel of esteemed science experts, though we have deep personal experience with salmon. Rather, this is an emotive deep dive into the lives of salmon, with them reflecting back to us what it means to be human in relationship with the wild and the natural world.
So, over the next 45 minutes, we are going to speak in human tongues on behalf of this extraordinary family of fish, taking you on a whirlwind, highly visual, 3-stop salmon tour, immersing you in the underwater world of these beautiful land, sea ambassadors in both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans.
So our first stop will be a condensed look at the past 25,000 years of our coexistence with these finny creatures, where we'll reveal this rich and entertaining history, but also how we've had 3 opportunities to get our relationship with salmon right without much success.
On our second stop, we'll take a deep dive into a series of watersheds on both our eastern and western coastlines, which will give us on-the-ground, first-hand insights into what has led salmon populations to drop to 6% of historical abundance, so we can harvest learnings from some remarkable stories of revival and hope.
So our third stop will explore practical internal and external ways we can make a paradigm shift in our own individual and collective relationship with salmon and the other creatures we share this planet with. And we'll hear about innovators that are achieving hopeful breakthroughs in efforts to return salmon runs.
And then at the end, we're going to take 15 minutes to hear from you about your salmon experiences and any questions you might have for us. So please feel free to make notes on your questions or ideas as we go along.
But first, why did we choose this somewhat strange title, Salmon as a Mirror, for our presentation tonight? Because it is our strong belief that the ultimate solution to a healthy relationship between salmon and ourselves is not to be found in rivers or even in the ocean, but rather inside the cranium of our 8 billion fellow Homo sapiens currently living on the planet. That includes you. And that this powerful brain of ours has been deeply conditioned by the world we were born into. A quote from the Bible sums up how many human view their relationship with the planet. Genesis 1:28 says, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heaven, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." Dominion over the fish of the sea. There's a bewildering array of different external causes for salmon to be declining, from overfishing, dams and pollution, climate change, it's warming of the waters, from logging practices to hatcheries. But these causes are all just numerators sitting on top of a giant human denominator. The root cause and the solution is sitting right here, in this room, right now, us. So we would like to try an experiment with you tonight while we look at ourselves in the salmon mirror. Because, we would like to invite you to think less and feel more. Because while I'm speaking right now, you're processing what I'm saying with your mind, but also deeper down in your body with your emotions and your instincts. Like this. I have been raised with salmon running like a bright thread through my life. And when I think of them not being in the rivers and ocean all around me, I feel as if I too will have disappeared. So integral to being a Pacific Northwesterner am I.
So, as a quick way to tap into this deeper in your body experience, we would like you to pause and take a deep breath with us for a second. Close your eyes and picture a time when you deeply connected with something in the non-human natural world. Take a place, a creature, or an experience. Take a moment. The way you feel right now when you reconnect with your relationship with the wild will allow you to be open to what is coming next. During this entire World Oceans Week, we representatives of the salmon will be turning to both science, appealing to your brain,
and art, appealing to your heart and gut, speaking to you on their behalf by employing the arts in the form of a series of salmon art panels throughout the club, 2 hands-on Gyotaku workshops like this one with the Blue Gens right in this very room, and lastly, through the condensed and evocative words of poetry. So to get us in the mood, I'd like to read you a poem I wrote for tonight that tracks one of these aha moments and that tracks one of these aha moments I had in my relationship with the wild, entitled All My Relations. The older I get, the more I think this life of ours is really just about relationships, especially my wild relations and our active stewardship of each other. And this is a late-breaking adult onset insight, which in truth was right in front of me all along, but obscured by my own worldview, thinking myself a liberal environmentalist servant of the commons. But really, I've been living inside a being conditioned by the experience and subtle, insinuating, human-centered worldview from my mother's womb forward. The evidence of my own homocentric bias is there if you look carefully and listen carefully to the words I use, like natural resources, me and it, man and nature. What if we had always seen the others as one of us, reclaiming our long-lost relations, the salmon as selfless inspiration in their holy migration up the rivers all around us, the seaweed-fringed shore generously offering our lungs its oxygen, the finely ground sand supporting our footsteps on long beach walks. These non-human elements making it possible to be human. And what then might the active form of my reciprocity take for such freely offered moment-by-moment gifts? Perhaps a good start is simply to have a heart that beats in gratitude, to take my place at the table in a humble way, empty of separation from those beings around me. To fully realize, here in this place I call home, that is not the image we wanted, was it? Give me a moment. Yes. There we go. And there, and there. This is a group of pieces I did from within 1 mile of my home. These are all the beings I share my home with. To fully realize here in this place I call home that the same sun and rain and earth that grows the massive Sitka spruce leaning into a winter storm outside my window grows me. Surrounded by my true family, we who have come down here together where we ought to be, giving and being given to in equal measure. All my relations.
So, speaking of relations, let's take a moment to meet some members of the salmon family. The Atlantic Ocean evolved one species, Atlantic salmon, while the Pacific, with its younger geology of mountains and shifting tectonic plates, was an experiment in diversity with 7 species evolving there.
Look at how beautiful these fish are. From their iridescent camouflage and ability to navigate using the Earth's electrical currents to their muscular 30-mile-per-hour bursts of speed, they have evolved a mythic life story. Losing their parents before birth, they traverse thousands of miles in the open ocean, only to return 4 or 5 years later to the river of their origin to spawn. Now, this persistence and this optimism of theirs made them enormously successful, and they spread in the Atlantic from the fjords of Norway to southern Spain, and from Newfoundland and Canada to the Connecticut River, and in the Pacific from the great rivers of the West to the island archipelago of Japan and the coastlines of Russia.
In just 75 years, we have spent nearly $1 trillion on this, $1 trillion in this country on salmon recovery to date.
Yeah.
More money than has been spent on any other species on the planet. That's more than has been spent over the past 65 years on an entire U.S. space program. This investment has been coupled with extraordinary efforts by tribes, agencies, NGOs, and institutions of higher learning. But if we continue on our same downward salmon spiral, we will see this iconic 60-million-year-old species largely disappear from the earth in our children's lifetimes.
What we believe has been missing in these efforts to return to balance is to make decisions and choices going forward, not from data analysis and yet more policy changes alone, because these brain-led activities have watched salmon species decline in the Pacific in my lifetime alone by 70%. The salmon airplane is heading straight to the ground. But as we touched on earlier, first we need to look internally, trusting what we are feeling as well as following our own instincts in order to connect with these creatures and make different sorts of healthy choices than we have in the past.
And isn't that what explorers have always done? Gone way beyond what is normal, pushing the limits of what it is to be human by having their brains, emotions, and instincts firing on all cylinders.
So during our preparation for World Oceans Week, we kept remembering the words of Robin Kimmerer, Native American writer and professor. All flourishing is mutual. And the question that then arises is, how do we achieve this elusive mutual flourishing?
Let's start by looking back for a moment at the braided history of humans and salmon in order to learn what we can from thousands of years of interacting.
This, by the way, is Conrad's hands braiding nettles, which is the base plant used for nets, and hence the name worldwide. So our relationship with salmon is ancient and powerful. Humans and salmon have been living side by side for hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeological sites as far back as 100,000 years ago reveal that indigenous populations of humans utilized prime salmon fishing locations over many, many generations.
So this is not a new relationship. Until several centuries ago, native communities coexisted sustainably with this family of species. Salmon gave humans their all in the form of food and became a wonderful cultural icon for many places throughout the world.
So for a moment, bear with us here. If the next 15 minutes were a movie, we'd be putting a warning label on it. For the story of the decline of salmon worldwide is not a pretty one. But let us look squarely and honestly into the salmon mirror, because like all challenging and thorny problems, it has many lessons that it can teach us, and we hold the key in our brains and our hands.
So let's start in the Atlantic, where much of the ancient history of salmon unfolded in the populated areas of Europe, where cities and towns were built near the great salmon rivers, like the Thames, the Seine, and the Rhine. I saw my first wild Atlantic salmon at the age of 5 in Ireland on the banks of the River Shannon, just down from my grandparents' farm. Local fishermen caught salmon, fresh from the sea, in their tiny currachs, a small and sustainable fishery in the 1960s. Salmon are so ingrained in the culture of Ireland, from the legendary salmon of knowledge myth to the famous Irish toast, Sláinte, which the full translation means, may you have the health of the salmon.
So shall we see a little bit more of that?
The Romans, when they invaded northern Europe, marveled at its acrobatics and called it sala, from the Latin salire, the leaper. Standing stones carved with its image are one of the few remnants that an ancient people, the Picts, left behind over 1,000 years ago.
We're here at Glamis in the precincts of the Kirk, and here, next to me, is the great Glamis stone, which is world famous, largely because of this etched salmon, wild Atlantic salmon. Now, this was probably carved by a Pictish engraver about 12 to 1300 years ago. The Picts were here in Scotland in the 7th, 8th and 9th centuries, and their culture focused on the natural environment in a very special way. If you look above the salmon, you'll see what people, I think incorrectly, describe as a serpent. I don't think it's a serpent at all. I think it's an eel. And the thing about the eel and the salmon is that both migrate. They're fish that cross human boundaries. They're fish that pay no attention to political frontiers. They travel the oceans. The eels, as we know, go to the Sargasso Sea to spawn, and where their young are born, and then they come back. And the salmon come here and they spawn, and then the small fish go to sea to get big. So this sense of the community-based culture, attributing to these remarkable animals an almost mystical sense of wisdom and understanding which they themselves were unable to grasp.
For millennia, around the North Atlantic, people awaited the annual return of the great fish. In Ireland and Scotland, the salmon fishery was a way of life. It fed whole communities. The ancient fishing village of Claddagh at the mouth of Galway Bay in the west of Ireland dates to pre-Christian times. And so valued were the fish to the town of Galway that a watchtower was built in the mid-1800s to announce the return of the salmon to the Corrib River. Salmon not only filled stomachs, it fed dreams. Taking this great fish on a gossamer line was soon a lifetime's thrill.
In the 16th and 17th century Northern Europe, many of the more densely settled areas started to impact the river systems that the Atlantic salmon depended on through habitat loss, fishing, and damming. The Thames River in London had significant and well-documented salmon runs as far back as a Magna Carta, mentioned as far back as a Magna Carta. In 1821, a record salmon was caught there weighing 83 pounds. Then, with the rapid expansion of the Industrial Revolution, pollution and overfishing accelerated salmon decline, and salmon declined in numbers. In 1860, the very last salmon was fished out of the River Thames. This was our first choice as humans of getting our relationship with salmon right, and it was an early precursor of the future demise of salmon. Then, our salmon story moves across the Atlantic to the shores of the east coast of America, and our second chance as a colonizing people to get the relationship right. When Europeans arrived in America in the 1600s, they observed the first people harvesting salmon as a major food source in the Atlantic Ocean and its rivers from Connecticut all the way north to the Arctic Circle. And that included waters of the Hudson and the East River, surrounding this very island we now stand on. Yes, Manhattan was originally salmon country. So maybe that is where you got your salmon, your fascination from lox from. Yeah. Native people harvested salmon predominantly with the spear in the shape of a trident. Some used weirs and basket traps to catch them. Salmon was only used for subsistence, and with their low population, it was a sustainable food source. It was not until the Europeans came that salmon became a commercial product. It went from feeding small villages to feeding cities in America, Europe, and the West Indies. As an example, the Connecticut River was one of the most prolific rivers in America. In the late 1700s, over 40,000 salmon returned each year, and fish that were as big as 40 pounds. The local Native Americans referred to the river as the smile of God. Oddly enough, this is a chapter where grains and textiles became salmon's worst enemy. As the European populations of the New England states grew, so did their appetite for grinding corn, grinding flour, and producing textiles. And what better way to do so than water-driven mills, which required damming of hundreds of rivers, thus blocking salmon's passage to their ancestral spawning grounds. By the year 1814, the entire salmon run in the Connecticut River was extinct. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the assaults on Atlantic salmon continued. Pulp mills, domestic and industrial pollution, clear-cutting of forests, hydroelectric development, pulp mills, mining, drift netting, and the high seas fishery. In the late 1970s, a newcomer threat further contributed to the massive decline of Atlantic salmon: aquaculture. Fish farms were installed in estuaries at the mouth of rivers. At the time, it was thought these farm salmon would relieve the pressure on wild populations, but a dark side to the business became evident as sea lice, disease, and escapement further weakened native populations of wild salmon. For a young salmon on its way to sea, these fish farms can be deadly. Wherever open net pen aquaculture is practiced, wherever there are large concentrations of farm salmon, wild salmon are in serious trouble. As of 5 years ago, the total population of Atlantic salmon in aquaculture net pens worldwide exceeded the populations of all the wild salmon in the oceans on Earth. In America, Atlantic salmon are now listed as endangered. Most native populations in the U.S. are gone, with the exception of a few remnant populations in the rivers of Maine. Their numbers tell the story. Between 1983 and 1990, the number of wild Atlantic salmon in the ocean declined from 7 million to 5 million. By 2016, they had fallen a further 33% to 3.38 million. And now, in 2025, they have dropped to an estimated 2.5 million. This is a silent extinction. Most angling on rivers is now catch and release, and there is no commercial fishing for Atlantic salmon.
But to give you some idea of the difference in salmon populations east coast to west coast, the 2024 numbers of Pacific salmon running up the Kenai River in Alaska alone exceeded the entire Atlantic salmon population forecast of 2.5 million fish. So here it is. We've arrived at our last stop for the salmon, the western coastline of America and Canada, with its thousands of rivers and prodigious runs of 5 different salmon species.
We will return to the watersheds of some of the eastern seaboard in a minute in order to hear some positive conservation success stories unfolding there. But first, we want to continue our salmon expansion westward to see if we learned any insightful lessons.
West Coast and Alaska. Many tribes of the Pacific Northwest lived on the bounty of spring and fall salmon runs, with the rivers turning red and black as these healthy runs of fish returned each year. The ceremonies and the stories that evolved culturally over the millennia were seasonally braided into everyday life of Native Americans. Then fur trappers started extracting beavers from Pacific Northwest watersheds in the early 1800s, altering the course of many rivers for salmon. And with the invention of canning, Europeans started large-scale industrialized strip mining of salmon here in the late 1800s, shipping most of it back to Europe in an ironic twist of fate. About 90% of Oregon salmon that was shipped out in cans went to the United Kingdom. So how did we do on that history lessons learned thing here on the West Coast? Well, over the past 150 years, we have watched the salmon populations, as Deirdre said earlier, in the lower 48 states decline to 94% of their original level to 6%. And what you're seeing in this mural, which is also, check it out here out in the hall, is all those white salmon were those that were present when Europeans first arrived. And the Gyotaku lit up ones are what we have left, 6 out of every 100. So, forgive me, we're going to go back. Yes. Yeah, if you can click me back, that'd be great. But for a moment, we'd like to take you north, beyond the lower 48 states and its cities and impacted rivers, to the last wild frontier of salmon itself, Alaska, and to visit the longest salmon river in the world, the 1,921-mile-long Yukon River, or as the Yupik people call it, the Quipok. It was here in the year 2014 that the B Corp Sustainable Seafood Company that I had co-founded, Fish People, established a commercial buying station 60 miles upstream from the ocean, working closely with a group of native Yupik villages on the edge of the Arctic Circle. This is the Mississippi of the West. The original runs of Chinook on this river, they were the most valuable in the world due to the large stores of fat they needed in their long journey up the river. They were called Yukon Golds, and in the 70s and 80s, they were discovered by the Japanese, who descended with rolls of US cash in their pockets, and within 10 years, the runs were gone. But the lifeblood of the river was its chum salmon runs, which is why we had come there, as they were listed as some of the most sustainable and healthiest runs in the world. We worked closely with the elder Yupik fishermen there, as well as the Alaska Fish and Game, on a native harvest process, as giant flushes of salmon would move up the river from the sea. And what a sight they were. Sometimes 1 million fish in a mile, if you can imagine that. And these fish were the only way of making a living for these peoples. The Yupik call these fish dog salmon, as they fed them to their sled dogs. And so for most of the year, these salmon provided the equivalent of diesel fuel for Yupik transportation. Isn't that the most amazing looking, almost impossible looking fish with that tiger striping that they develop when they get into the freshwater? So we closed our operations in 2016 during the infamous years of the climate change generated high pressure weather blob that came and parked itself in the Gulf of Alaska and spiked water temperatures to never before seen levels. Note the red in the Gulf of Alaska there to the right. That raised temperatures almost 10 degrees in certain locations. 10 degrees of an entire water body. The critical foundational food stocks of krill and bait fish either went deeper to cooler waters or died off, leaving almost no food for the surface fishes like salmon. By 2017, the abundant and famous cod stocks in Alaska had collapsed, followed by closures of both the snow and king crab fisheries. This shocked fish biologists worldwide. It was the biggest climate change-related news story on the planet, and very few people even knew about it. Think about what it means for an ecosystem when the king crabs have disappeared. And in 2021, for the very first time in history, the state of Alaska closed that same Yukon River to all fishing of any kind. Salmon decline had arrived even here in their last natural strongholds. Remember what I said about the warning on the movie? So bear with us. And that moment in the Yukon, for me, I spent a lot of time up there, it was the most sobering and dramatic glimpse into the salmon mirror. Now, at each of these important junctions in our history with salmon, we have largely missed the opportunities to update our human operating system with them and our way of seeing and relating to other beings besides our fellow human beings. So, we have arrived in the present day, halfway through the year 2025. The same human operating system of ours has generated what we call a complexity of causes for salmon's decline. So to better frame our next chapter on opportunity and hope, let's look at a few of those complexity of causes, or these problems we face today, right now, together with salmon. How did we get here? Some express this as the 4 H's: habitat, harvest, hatcheries, and hydropower. Now, this takes the form of ocean and river overfishing, the damming of rivers, habitat destruction through logging, development, and pollution, extensive building and expansion of hatcheries, and all of it is amplified by the climate-driven effects on saltwater ocean conditions that we saw earlier, and the food chain like forage fish stocks, as well as the freshwater habitat for rearing and spawning. Salmon need nice, cool, refreshing refugia. Well, like these heat-impacted sockeye. See why we say the salmon problem and its solutions are so complex? Keep in mind that a salmon only lives to be an average of 4 or 5 years old. So you can eliminate a 1,000,000-year-old run of salmon in a river forever in that short period of time. Interestingly, when writing this, we realized that these were all really just those big numerators on top of a giant human denominator, and how we are the root cause of all of them. I believe that the Maoris of Aotearoa are spot on when they call us the only real species of concern. So that's it for our history lesson. After our 3-part journey from Northern Europe to the eastern and western seaboards of America, we stand at the threshold of another opportunity, one that we call our 4th chance. There are abundant examples of salmon's remarkable resilience and ability to come roaring back, even if given half a chance. So let's take you on a quick exploration of some iconic salmon rivers on both our eastern and western coastlines to hear and see some inspiring real-life examples of what's happening in these lands and waterscapes.
Salmon are remarkably resilient. They have adapted and changed over millions of years and made it through multiple ice ages and survived. Removing barriers to their ancient pattern of migration is one of the biggest steps we can take to ensure their return to abundance. The Penobscot River in Maine was once one of the great salmon rivers in the East until dams were built in the 1930s. For more than 80 years, so valued were the Atlantic salmon from Maine that the first one caught on the Penobscot each spring was presented to the President of the United States. The last presidential salmon was caught in 1992 because salmon population had dropped so low they could not justify taking even one salmon from that river. Yet, there is new hope on this river. Humans are relooking at their original choice to build dams and are now taking them out. In 2012 and 13, the lower dams on the Penobscot finally came out and salmon numbers started to increase.
The Penobscot River in Maine was once a great salmon river until dams blocked the way for migrating fish.
I'm looking at a broken river that we've had here. You know, for over 100 years, we've had this dam and then several other dams above it. You know, we've tried to build hatcheries to put fish in above these dams, but we've never really addressed the problem that there are just too many dams in this river. And the VZ Dam here, this dam is at the head of tide. 100% of the spawning grounds for species like Atlantic salmon are all above this dam. These dams on the main stem river were built back in the 1930s. So since that time, salmon have come to these dams and not been able to then get any farther to their spawning grounds. Over time, we've built fish ladders that largely haven't worked. We've had 2 studies in the last decade that have said if we're going to restore Atlantic salmon on these big rivers in Maine, like the Penobscot, we have to reduce the number of dams. And the Penobscot project does that. This project will remove 2 big main stem dams and bypass a 3rd dam. So we're addressing the root of the problem for the first time on this river in 183 years.
And here's an image of the VZ Dam being taken down in 2013.
And now we turn to the watersheds and rivers in the West and similar dam removals on Washington's fabled Elwha and California's immense Klamath rivers. The Elwha removal was the first major dam in history to come down in the West, and within weeks of its removal, Chinook and steelhead populations were already in the rise and returning to upstream reaches for the first time since 1913. If you notice on the right-hand side, that small little bluff that's sticking up, this is what it looks like today. That's that same little bluff. You would never have known there was a dam there. In 2024, thousands of new spawning salmon were surveyed in the upper reaches, and health had returned to the entire main stem of this renowned and famous river in the Olympic Peninsula. And there's a similar story, many of you may have heard it, that unfolded this past year on the Klamath River, even a bigger system, where almost 1 million salmon were able to pass several former dam locations, accessing cooler waters and prime spawning habitats. And on the horizon is the biggest prize of all, the potential removal of a series of dams on the Snake River, which block thousands of miles of spawning habitat and millions of fish from returning to their ancestral grounds. That will make global headlines when it happens. For those of you that were here earlier and saw Conrad talking, he mentioned the demise of the southern pod of orca in the Puget Sound. Taking these dams out would do a great service to the return of those orca. So now let's visit what many consider the greatest salmon river of all, the mighty Columbia, which forms the border between Oregon and Washington. At its peak, this body of water boasted salmon runs of over 50 million fish. 50 million. From its headwaters in central Canada, it winds its way over 1,200 miles to where it meets the sea, forming a river bar that's 3 miles wide at its mouth. And the volume of water is so great that it's nicknamed the graveyard of the Pacific for all the ships it has sent to the bottom. Running over that bar back in the 1970s quickly made me into a man when I worked as a commercial fisherman on my family's salmon trawler there at the tender age of 13. Like so many of the waterways we've heard about, it too suffered staggering losses of salmon in the 1800s and throughout the 1900s, and most of that was due to dams which generate much of the power for the entire PNW region and also cut off thousands of miles of spawning habitat. I mean, they call this, ironically, the waterfall graph, right? But in one of the most ironic and positive twists of fate in our whole salmon saga, we begin by introducing you to a simple wooden technology that has been used in these waters for 1,000 or more years: fish traps. One of the most effective forms of harvest for native peoples were these weirs or fish traps which blocked a river with wooden stakes, funneling fish into holding areas where they could be easily captured or released. These were erected in prime fishing locations for seasonal periods and then dismantled to allow the runs to continue to prosper. And then came the Europeans, who observed this effective way of fishing, and they quickly adopted it, but with a large-scale industrial twist using steam pile drivers to create traps with a forest of logs that were miles long, capable of harvesting hundreds of thousands of fish at a time, basically clear-cutting whole runs. So fast forward to today, there's a group of forward-thinking, nonprofit, wild fish conservancies that have quietly gone about adopting this same fish trap concept, but this time in an ingenious way to replace current methods of fishing on the river that are indiscriminate to what they catch. Note that our colleague Connor Gowell has been instrumental in the building and adoption of these traps. The photos you are seeing are from his firsthand experiences. Now, the current dominant method for harvesting salmon on the Columbia is gill netting, which catches any fish that pokes its head into the opening of a net. This can lead to unintended death of a fish who are not the species the fisherman is targeting or is endangered. Fish traps, however, allow all the fish to be safely guided into an area where the trap tenders can view them in the water, selectively target the right species for harvest, letting the others go free to continue their migration upstream. And these traps have a dual purpose in that they also provide an invaluable research tool for understanding salmon runs, their timing, their numbers. And after 5 years of trials, 3 traps will generate sustainably harvested salmon for market this fall, while offering a unique window into how salmon are evolving in response to a changing climate. This effort will care for fishing families and endangered fish populations simultaneously. This is one of my favorite parts of what we put together. This is a dramatic, real-life example of how our world view is the pivotal key. The same technology used at different scales can either bring a beautiful, iconic wild species to the edge of the extinction or be a powerful tool in returning them to abundance again. So from one of our longest salmon rivers, we're now going to visit one of the West Coast's shortest, but one with a mighty learning that has changed the way the world sees salmon, early stages of life in fresh water. And this is a river I live on the banks of. Now, Oregon has a dead straight coastline with few ports and harbors, but it has lots of rivers. And like this one, but that produces more salmon than any other waterways outside of Alaska. And as I said, this river is aptly named the Salmon River, and it's where my wife and I have made our home and been active in conserving large tracts of land on Oregon's central coastline. I have walked and waded from its headwaters to where it meets the sea. And I currently act as co-director of UNESCO Biosphere Region that encapsulates not only this entire watershed, but also a marine reserve, which we established offshore. Now, this 31-mile-long waterway is valuable to study for many reasons, one of which is that it's one of the 5 salmon treaty rivers worldwide, meaning that much of how 4 salmon nations agree to plan regarding the future of salmon and set quotas, etc. And it is also blessed to still have an incredible flush of fall run Chinook and steelhead every year. And I took this picture on the Siletz River, just below the falls, and these are all 20-plus pound beautiful Chinook waiting to jump those falls. But its real value, in light of our journey here together today, comes from wise choices, ones that reversed years of diking and development of amusement and trailer parks that had dramatically degraded its fertile estuaries in the 60s and 70s. And it all began with a study of the estuary conducted by a pioneering giant in salmon studies by the name of Dan Bottom. He and his team debunked an old, globally accepted theory that all native and hatchery salmon have identical freshwater beginnings to their life, where they come down streams and immediately head out to sea. What their study showed is that the estuaries were actually acting as invaluable incubators for young fry and parr, and that the salmon coming from healthy, undisturbed estuaries had much higher rates of successful return to their rivers of origin. In the salmon world, this was big news worldwide. They also found that there were dozens of different patterns of behavior in salmon, which is a form of diversity as nature's insurance. Some headed straight to sea, others stayed in the estuary up to a year, others even headed back upstream for a time. Now, knowing all these estuarine benefits to rearing salmon has helped globally revolutionize how governments and NGOs think about estuaries and implement protection against decades of our previous drain the swamp mentality. Sound familiar? In the salmon rivers case, this was personally poignant for me, as I have watched all our important wild coho runs returning there due to their habitat being restored and competition for the hatchery program eliminated. The result, a 10x rise in native coho populations.
So we have traveled through the history and also journeyed through these iconic watersheds where we have witnessed both the challenges and resilience of salmon ecosystems. We now stand at our 4th historic opportunity to transform our relationship with these extraordinary beings. Let's take the last portion of our remaining time together to explore how we might finally get it right.
Now, we used this close-up of a salmon as a metaphor. See the line running horizontally down its sides? It's really a set of specialized scales that contain magnetite, a naturally occurring mineral that allows salmon to receive signals from the Earth's magnetic field and hence navigate its world. The original GPS system. So like this lateral line, our next section is a navigational tool that, if used, will help to break the patterns of the past and lead to a brighter future and mutual flourishing for salmon and for humans.
This is where you're probably expecting us to provide you with a laundry list of actions you can take in the external world, the how-to of fixing the problem. But returning to where we started, we'd like to turn inward first to examine how our own thoughts, emotions, and instincts lead us to better choices and healthier relationship. Because as we've seen, salmon just don't need our help. They offer us a reflection of our own capacity for transformation.
So I'm going to model the inner transformation we're talking about by sharing a quick story of one of the most pivotal moments in my own internal relationship with the wild. It began in freezing cold water in the middle of winter. Conrad took me swimming with migrating salmon for the first time deep in the upper reaches of Oregon's coastal mountain rivers. And I'll be honest, at first, all I felt was the icy blast on my face and thought for a minute, what have I gotten myself into? But then I saw them. Big salmon gathered in a clear pool, rafted up, pointed into the current, not fleeing, not fighting, just being. Gliding with grace, dipping, feeding, and moving in harmony with the river. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't relating to salmon with a hook in my hand. I wasn't the actor, they were. I was in their world on their terms for the very first time. It was quiet. It was sacred. it changed everything for me. From that moment forward, salmon were no longer a resource to manage. They were beings who had their own lives and families and quirky personalities to relate to. Kin, not commodities. And with that shift, a deeper truth emerged. When we expand our mental frameworks to recognize the inherent rights of rivers, watersheds, and salmon themselves, our relationship transforms from dominion to reciprocity, from control to collaboration. This is the most essential action we can all take, not a policy, not a program, but an internal shift in how we as humans see the world. So from the internal world, let's turn to the external one for a moment. The high-level collective solutions we are sharing with you now aren't just about saving salmon. They're about reimagining what it means to be human in a relationship with the natural world. And please note, many of these are targeted to Pacific salmon species where we have sufficient runs.
First, we must protect and restore salmon habitat at a scale that reduces a centuries-long decline and degradation. Remove barriers to salmon migrating, prioritizing the locations that will have the greatest impact. Dam removals are a great example.
Second, we must transition where we harvest fish to take place in or near the mouths of rivers where runs are stable, or what we call bubble fisheries.
Third, reduce the intake of any threatened or endangered salmon populations to a maximum of 10 to 15%, a sustainable level that still honors cultural needs.
Very different than many of the treaties that exist today. And fourth, redirect or eliminate the resources spent on what they call artificial propagation programs, i.e. hatcheries, that don't contribute to the recovery of wild fish. Now, not all hatcheries are equal. Many hatcheries hinder recovery, while a select few contribute to it. And so now we want to share some tangible on-the-ground actions you can take part in. As a citizen activist, you can support modern fish traps. We've heard about them already. But you can also support the conservation-focused fish trap fisheries and the NGOs that are building them. You can attend local fisheries meetings. You can ask your state agency to permit and fund these non-lethal alternatives. You can use the law as a lever, support legal action. When governments fail to uphold salmon protection, citizen lawsuits become crucial accountability tools, and they've been remarkably successful in those 2 rivers you saw where dams were taken out. So you can stay informed through organizations like Conrad's Wild Fish Conservancy, or as we advocate for salmon, let us use the tools not just to defend what remains, but to reimagine what could be.
And here's another set of actions you can take as a consumer or fisher. 1, shift the market. Choose better farmed salmon. Land-based systems like recirculating aquaculture systems prevent escapes, disease, and sea lice. You can look for best aquaculture practices or Aquacultural Stewardship Council labels. Ask grocers and restaurants to cook with sustainably farmed salmon. 2, fish with intention. Respect the wild ones. Hatchery fish can be kept. Wild fish deserve to return home. So you can learn to identify the difference between native and hatchery salmon, follow selective guidelines, fishing guidelines, educate your fishing partners, children, and the public regarding the importance of their wild DNA. No action is too small. Every letter, every purchase, every moment of awareness adds up to a river of change.
So, once the rivers ran silver. Salmon came home by the millions, each one a heartbeat in a great rhythm of renewal. Their journey was not just a cycle, it was a promise, one we broke again and again as humans. We've stood at the threshold of change before 3 times, and each time we tried to protect what was left, not reimagine what could be different and better in the future. We forgot that abundance, not scarcity, is a salmon's natural state and ours too. But the good news is the story is not over, because anything made by humans can be unmade by them. The barriers, the mindsets, the policies, these are not fixed. They are ours to transform. So let us no longer ask only how to prevent collapse. Let us ask how to become part of that mutual flourishing, a return to the living abundance that Salmon teaches us is possibility. This means using law not as a fence, but as a seed, a way to grow new possibilities. I volunteered my time to come here tonight to this gathering in the midst of a busy life to speak in a human tongue on behalf of Salmon, and because I believe my contribution would help in some way to leave a world where my 2 granddaughters, when they grow as old as I am, can still go quietly to the edge of a river and watch salmon spawning in the fall. And as we have seen, salmon are ocean explorers and river-born kin. They feed forests and cultures and coastlines. Our fate is tied to their fate.
So, 2 quick things to leave you with. What if we made a promise to them, those brave souls who returned from their epic journey in the sea? In the next 24 hours, write your own salmon promise, a vow to act, protect, restore, or perhaps simply see them in the wild world they live in differently, and in doing so, ensure them the same future we want for ourselves. Tape it to your mirror, share it with a friend or family, post it with an image of a salmon, and let it remind you that every action, however small, can ripple across watersheds and generations.
In closing, we'd like to play a film featuring a poem that was dictated to me by a large female Chinook salmon hen who wanted to communicate directly with all of you. This film is touring the US as one of the top 10 shorts from the Telluride Film Festival, and it was a collaboration between myself and a talented young female videographer named Whitney Hassett.
So I'll read the title first and then I am Salmon. My body, the elegant result of millions of years of trial and error, adapting to mountain ranges that have come and gone, rivers once flowing, now dry, rocks made and unmade, and me, still here. I am Salmon, and my body is a simple miracle, red of gill, iridescent of scale, muscled for bursts and glides, small white ear bone in my head bearing witness to it all, what I ate and when and where, and this only one page in the book that I am. And you 2-legged ones, you of chainsaws and dams and sharpened hooks and strong nets, you who we call the salmon eaters, who amongst you could survive being dropped from your mother's belly onto clean black rock, into cold rush of oxygen-rich waters, emerging with only an egg sac at your belly for a jump start and nothing more. Tumbling down tributaries into estuaries where the tang of salt burns your gills, spit out the mouth of the river into the great liquid canyons of the continental shelf, with its legions of oil-rich eulachon, sandlance, anchovy, and herring. Who amongst you could return from a great arc to the north, looping back 4 years later in a navigational miracle to the very river of your birth, feeling your flesh pulled from your bones, no food in your belly, single-minded purpose of passing the genetic baton and the perfect, tiny red spheres? Who amongst you? And all we ask in return is to honor our gift by making the work you do in the world extraordinary, burning us as rich, ripe fuel so that the work you do in the world is extraordinary. I am Salmon.
So and now we want to hear from you. How you might...
Only for a minute.
Okay, if there's any questions.
We'll take a question. There it is.
Duncan, you said we could identify between the farm salmon and the wild salmon by that fin gets clipped off. Did you mention that?
That's more hatcheries and natives, yeah. So they add a host fin on the back, yes. Yes, I'm good.
We need, for the stream, you have to, so they can hear you.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so yes, hatchery fish, you can know, you can tell, yes.
How do you know the difference between a good farm-raised and a not so good farm-raised?
So a BAP, we talked about BAP as a certification regime. You can ask them if they're certified, and that means they're inspected and that they are using a totally different approach in terms of their feedstocks, waste, disease. So those are trustable, and as are recirculating aquaculture systems, yeah.
Will it have it labeled on it like when you go to the grocery store?
Usually, but not always, so you can always ask your fishmonger, where are your BAP salmon? One of the things I'd like to point out is that we will offer any of you that are interested to come up and get a card from me, and we will pass on all those actions, both internal and external, that we cover tonight, if you'd like to follow up on them in your own lives. So please come up and get something, and we'll make sure you have those.
Well, I just want to, it's, what an incredible presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to take a short break, and then at 6:30 we're going to start with the next, this evening's presentation. I hope you'll all stay. Deirdre and Duncan are here. I know they'd love to chat.